notes, we had left off on the slide about sensory deprivation, which we know can be used as a form of torture, or it could be used as a form of meditation. But when it's extreme, like what we saw in the case study with the little girl Jeannie, she was found chained to a chair and she didn't know any words other than her name and the words yes and no. That's extreme sensory deprivation, and that is against the Geneva Convention. Don't do that at home, kids. But just basic sensory deprivation in small amounts can be productive at times, but otherwise it could lead to mental health issues. For instance, in the prison system, the use of isolation cells. At least when I worked at juvie, that's what we called them. We called them ISO cells. Prisons, they call it solitary confinement. There were limits to how long you could put a child in solitary confinement at juvie, unless there were special circumstances like they were literally a danger to other people existing. And then with prisons with adults, you don't have a strict set of rules that's generally followed. And so that's a huge issue with human rights of when we're doing isolation or solitary confinement, what is our main goal? Is it the protection of people within the jail or the inmates themselves? Or are we using it as a means of punishment, punitive? And what are the effects of that? So looking at sensory deprivation, this is the deliberate cutoff of sensation through blindfolds or hoods. You can even cut off the sense of smell, touch, and taste. For instance, if you wanted to cut off someone's ability to taste, all you'd have to do is close their nose, because those chemical senses are very closely tied together. In terms of touch, there are certain medications that can make you impervious to pain. There is actually a disease in which you are impervious to pain, and that's actually not as great as it sounds, because pain is meant to be a warning sign to us. It's supposed to let us know, hey, something is about to burst or something along those lines. Usually when we think of senses, we try to heighten them in order to get more perception from our environment. Now, short-term sessions of sensory deprivation, like we said before, can be fine, but extended or forced sensory deprivation can lead to mental illness, even hallucinations. So someone can literally break from reality and go through a period of psychosis if they go through extreme sensory deprivation. In fact, if you perform sensory deprivation at a specific time in a young animal's or a young person's life, you can actually prevent them from using that sense for the rest of their life. Like we saw with Jeannie, she was cut off from people talking, and so she never really learned how to talk. She never really grasped the syntax of grammar. She's able to learn a handful of words, but she was never able to communicate fully like a normally developed human would. And that's because early in her life, she had a sensitive period where that sensation was cut off. Now, clearly, we can't just take a bunch of babies and cut off their senses and then try to figure out what happens to them as they get older. That would be a problem with ethics. But you can do that with animals. So in this particular example, kittens were raised in an environment like you see here, where all you see are vertical lines. So there are no horizontal lines in this environment. So during that critical period or that sensitive period, they were deprived from that sort of sensation. So later, their neurons had not formed to be able to recognize that same sensation. So later in life, they could not perceive the bars as easily. So sensory deprivation is actually going to have long-lasting effects on infants. So if you're young and you're deprived from a sense, like let's say for some reason your parents blindfold you until 6 months, then your brain never connects to your eyes. The optic nerve is basically useless, because you haven't been, quote unquote, exercising it in order to form those connections. All right, perceptual adaptation. This is our ability to change our perception. That's what adaptation means. So basically, when we're thinking about vision, we know that when we are looking at something, it actually flips upside down in our eye. And then that upside down message gets sent to our thalamus, and then it gets sent to our what lobe? Occipital lobe, good. And in your occipital lobe, it flips that image right side up. Well, if you're in an environment where your vision is changed, like say for instance you wear prism glasses and it inverts your vision, then eventually your brain is going to be able to see like normal after it adapts to that new environment. So you're wearing these glasses that flip your vision upside down, and at first you can't see anything. You're just walking into walls and you have no depth perception because you're like, everything is upside down. But then eventually your brain will make the switch. Your brain will learn, oh, all I have to do is flip it over again and you'll be able to see. But it would take hours of you wearing these glasses and possibly a headache in order to make that switch. So if any of you have ever had glasses or contacts, have you ever gotten a new prescription and at first it's like, ow? Yeah, like you're getting used to it, you gotta like break it in. And then if you lose those glasses and you have to go back to your old ones, you put them on and you're like, ah, again, it's terrible. So basically, same way you would break in shoes, you can break in your glasses. So after a while, you stop noticing that change because your brain adapts to it. Another way that our brain adapts is in terms of interpreting what we expect to see. We have certain schemas, okay? We have certain perceptual sets that we have in life. So when we go into a restaurant, we expect to see tables and chairs and waiters and all of this. You wouldn't expect to walk in and see people with machetes, right? Because you're using well, some of you are like, well, I'd go to that restaurant. So you're using top-down processing where your brain basically fills in the gaps. So the reason we're talking about this is because sometimes our perceptual sets, our top-down processing is incorrect, but our brain sees what it thinks it's supposed to see. So when you look in a refrigerator, you expect to see food, maybe some ketchup, maybe some soda. Is that what's in this refrigerator in this picture? No. What's actually there? Books, yes, dead trees. So when we just glance at this picture, when you first see it, your brain automatically says that's a fridge. Top-down processing means that there must be or soda in that fridge. And so your brain temporarily creates that image. But then as you look closer and you use bottom-up processing, that's when you see, oh, actually, my brain pulled a sneaky on me. That's a refrigerator full of books. Basically, we're using context clues in order to make sense of our environment. Because remember, that's all perception is. It's taking in all of this sensation and then trying to make it meaningful. So when we look at more illusions as it comes to vision, what's the very first thing that you see based on the context of this photo? A man playing the saxophone. Because of the context clues that are given to us, like here, clearly that's some glasses. You see some white dots here that basically make the outline of a hairline. But if you take away that context, those white random dots, then you're left with this. And what do you see immediately there? Yeah, you see a face, you see a woman. So if it's presented like this without any context, you could see either a man playing the saxophone and then maybe this is a little bird over here for some reason, or you may see a woman first. But if I present you with this first, you're going to see that the saxophone is still very strong as a schema. But then if you add context like this, then it's very difficult for you to see the saxophone player. So if I had shown you this image first and then went here, you'd probably more likely see the woman than the saxophone player. So what you're presented with first actually has an impact on your top-down processing. All right, so now we're going to get into the pseudoscience. This is fake psychology or pop psychology, kind of like learning styles. Because y'all have heard of like, oh, auditory learning styles versus visual learners versus kinetic learners. Yeah, no, that's not actually scientifically based. I mean, it sounds cool. And, you know, the education department like really jumped on that, like, oh, yeah, we got to do different learning styles. And it's like, actually, y'all will adapt to whatever you're told to do. That's pretty much how it works. So learning styles, more so in the pop psychology level. Same thing with your zodiac sign, or really even personality tests, other than the multiphasic. Because the personality test, the multiphasic personality test is meant to diagnose disorders, as in personality disorders like bipolar disorder or borderline personality disorder or sociopathy, antisocial personality disorder. That's scientifically valid. But this whole I'm an INFP or an ENFJ, yeah, that's the same as saying I'm a Sagittarius or I'm a Cancer. Although how many people have told me that I'm a Cancer? All right, so extrasensory perception is extra senses. Okay, so this is information that you get without the original 7 senses. So what are our original 7 senses that are based in science? Okay, touch, smell, hearing, taste, seeing. Yeah, someone said see. Balance, your vestibular sense. And what do we call the movement sense? Kinesthetic, good. What is the scientific term for tasting? Gustatory. I think of it in terms of like mnemonic device of I took Spanish, so I was like, oh, me gusta food. So tasting, I like food. What about hearing? What is the scientific term for that? Auditory, your auditory sense. And then what about balance? No, balance is not the scientific term for balance. Starts with a V, not the cerebellumus. That sounds like a Harry Potter spell. A V. Lexi put it in the chat. Vestibular. Good. Your vestibular sense. So parapsychology deals with ESP, not ESPN. Okay, that's sports ball, which I can't tell you anything about that. Yeah, that's when you get a checkmate after you kick the football. Yeah, but you can't touch the football with your hands because that's illegal. You can't touch the football with your hands. It's called football. ESP, so that's extrasensory perception. So other than your 7 original senses, you're able to have spooky powers. What is telepathy? Yeah, reading people's minds and being able to communicate with people without using words. What extra sense would you, or what superpower would you possibly want to have? I would want to have the ability to read minds because I cannot read people. You could just think about it in terms of a test. Just like being in the same room as somebody and they're across the room, but you can still cheat off of them because you can hear their thoughts. But then I would also not want to know people's thoughts because I would just be sitting here teaching, and then over there Sam's going to be like cerebellumus. And I wouldn't be able to focus. I would be too focused on hearing all of y'all's stupid thoughts. My thoughts are enough. I don't even like being alone with those. All screaming and TV static, is that your superpower?
No, it's not mine.
Oh. So your mind is kind of like when you drink a LaCroix. Yeah. That LaCroix tastes like static. Yeah, it's like if you bit into a candle. Yeah, it's French water and I don't like it. All right, what about clairvoyance? What's that? LaCroix? See, this is why I shouldn't have mind reading. Because it would just be this nonstop. I'd be trying to write an essay or something in class, and it would just be like, baby shark. And I'd be like, who? Yo, what's clairvoyance? Precognition is more the predict stuff. Clairvoyance is when you can like touch something and get a message from it, or you can talk to the dead. So talking to the dead, like, was it Long Island Psychic? They have like a whole TV show. But y'all know that this type of extrasensory perception has never been confirmed scientifically. It's more so that they're reading your micro expressions. So basically, when you read someone's micro expressions, it can either tell you you're on the right track or you're on the wrong track. So they see little things like if your upper lip curls, that's disgust. Or your eyebrows go up, that's surprise or shock. So they're able to see these muscle movements that you actually can't cognitively control. And they're so good at reading it that they're just able to trick you into believing that they're talking with someone dead. Big, like vague statements like, I feel over here someone has lost a person whose name starts with H. And then of course this one person's going to be like, me, I lost my cat, Henry. And then it just goes from there. They just keep on picking up signs and basically reading the room in order to get that information. What about telekinesis? Telekinesis is not on this list. But what can you do with telekinesis? Yeah, you can move things with your mind, which would also be really cool. So basically all of this is just parapsychology. None of it is scientifically valid so far. So when it comes to extras in this lecture, so talking about James Gibson, he's one of the people who's responsible for our monocular cue, and monocular cue means how many eyes? One eye. And that monocular cue is the texture gradient for perceiving depth. So the more detail you can see, the closer it appears to be. The blurrier or hazier something is, then the further away it is perceived to be. All right, so what monocular cues that allow you to see depth are at play in this image? Yeah, light and shadow. So you can see here there's different shades of yellow and orange. And so we perceive the orange as being more shadow. So it gives the perception of depth, that we're in a room and that the light source is closer to us, and that wherever it's darker and oranger must be farther away. What else is at play here? Yeah, linear perspective. So you have linear perspective because looking at these lines, they all converge at a point, or they look as if they're about to converge at a point. So that point is somewhere down here where it gets super, super blurry as these lines start getting closer and closer together. So that's linear perspective. How big do you think this room is? And how do you know? Yeah, you're looking at the two children, and how old do you think these children are? Yeah, they're small. Their age is small. So if you look at these children, they look like toddlers. So basically this room, by virtue of relative height, this room is probably only 2.5 toddlers tall. So it's not like a huge church where it's got like a dome ceiling and you can fit an entire Christmas tree in here. All right, based on the relative height of these children, you would perceive this room as being a fairly low ceiling room. 2.5 children tall. I think that's approximately how many kids Americans have. It's like you have 2.5 kids. All right. Also, in terms of schema and top-down processing, when you look at this field, what do you expect to see? All right. So you see chickens. All right. What animal do we see as like having pale skin, no fur, and just standing in a field? Pigs or sheep. Maybe they're sheep that have been sheared. So that's using top down. If we automatically see, oh, those are pigs, then we think, oh, top down. But now use bottom up, no pun intended.
Oh my gosh.
If you're using bottom up and you're using your senses, you're like, okay, there's some butts in there. Those are a bunch of naked people that have just gathered in a field for whatever reason. Maybe they're praying. I don't know. Maybe they're doing a tornado drill. So they're not going to make it. Survival of the fittest. All right. So this is just a mnemonic device to help you remember top down versus bottom up. Top down, you see pigs because you're not paying attention. Your brain fills in the blanks. And now your brain is trying to erase this image. But bottom up, you're like, oh, that's actually a bunch of naked people living their best life? I don't know. In terms of grouping, if we were to group these together, if you look at this top row, we group them together based on similarity. So not proximity because they're all the same distance apart, they're equidistant. But we view this top row as similar because we perceive a what? A face. So you see a man's face. So here's eyes, here's still some eyes. It gets a little blurry. It gets a little more like Picasso, like, hey, this is abstract art. But you can still pretty much see a face in this top row. But once you get to like right here, you're not really seeing a face. So in this bottom row, we group them together based on similarity because instead of seeing a face, we perceive what? If you're having difficulty, look at this one. A woman. Okay, there's a woman with her hair, and then here's a hand, and then here's an arm, and then here's her leg. So a sitting woman. Now, in terms of vision, people perceive different things when it comes to vision, most notably in color blindness. Now, which gender is more likely to have color blindness, men or women? Men, because color blindness is sex linked. It is linked to your X chromosome. Now, women have 2 X chromosomes. So if we get an X chromosome with the gene for color blindness, but then we have another X chromosome, that recessive gene doesn't get expressed. But how many X chromosomes do males have? Typically just 1. You have an X and a Y. Okay. Oh, there's some genetic disorders where you can have 2 X's and a Y. It happens. So if you're a guy and you have an X and a Y, and your X chromosome has the gene for color blindness, you don't have another X chromosome in your back pocket to override that color blindness gene. And so you're going to be colorblind. Now, when we say colorblind, people typically think, oh, it must be like chromatopsia, where they can't see anything except gray. They must be like dogs, where it's just they see gray and no other colors. That's not the case. There are many different types of color blindness. So when we see red, for instance, somebody with deuteratonopia or green blind color blindness will see brown. Their red is brown. Their green is brown. Their orange is another color brown, like mustard color. If you have red blindness, again, you cannot perceive the color red. And just think of how many colors have the color red mixed with them. For instance, over here, this blue Among Us character is supposed to be purple, but blue and red together make purple. So if you can't perceive the color red, then everything that's purple to you will appear blue, which will lead to some interesting fashion choices, I'm sure. A chromatopsia right here, that's completely colorblind. So they only have rods. Yeah, because rods can help you see black and white and in low light conditions, but you need cones in order to see color. So that's the issue right there. I'm not sure. Can someone Google how rare achromatopsia is? Now, if y'all are looking at this and you're just like, I don't get it, I don't see any difference, then you may want to tell your doctor, because I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to tell you what kind of colorblind you are. So apparently 1 out of every 30,000 to 40,000 people has achromatopsia, according to Matthew. Every 30,000. Yeah.